How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today we're talking all about turbo decks. We've been talking about being in a turbo meta and some of the faster decks getting more popularity, becoming maybe a little bit more powerful, pushing wins, people adopting them more, which tends to lead to more of them doing well. And so today I want to talk about cEDH decks that are among the fastest in the format, that are doing pretty well right now, that I would be considering playing a tournament, and what makes them stand out. I want to talk about why you might want to select them, what makes them better than the others, what's making them do so well right now, ranging from very stapley decks in the format that you probably know pretty well and understand how they work, but still talking about what makes them so successful and why maybe they're still even underplayed, and then going a little bit to the more fringy side of decks that are still doing fairly well right now, but maybe at like a lower sample size that might be underplayed or might at least have something going on for them that could be explored more. I wanted to talk about the angle of attacking a turbo format from the turbo perspective, and if you're interested in me covering kind of the opposite, which I think would be more card based than deck based, but we'll get into that one if we do a video on it, and talk about how to combat a turbo format from the side of maybe a slower mid-rangey, even to potentially stacks kind of deck, and what tools you would use to employ to maybe do well in that regard. If you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe, let me know down below what deck you're playing right now. Are you tuning it to be faster? Have you switched to a faster deck? Do you feel like your deck has been kind of pushed out? Let me know what you're thinking about a faster meta and how that's impacted your gameplay. And I think with all that being said, though, we can go ahead and hop into it.
Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want, really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try.
So right now I'm looking at the top decks with more than 20 entries based on conversion rate, which is not exactly like a perfect scientific way to say, okay, this is the best deck in the format, but it is probably the easiest way to look at a scaling of what amount of players who are using these decks are seeing what we would consider a successful result. For most people, top 16, top 10, whatever, is a success. For instance, playing RAL at an event, and these are 50 or higher events, so gold level events, 30% of RAL pilots have a successful tournament, meaning they get top cut. Now, for them, a win might be success, or even getting one win might be a success. But based on kind of the arbitrary metric we're currently using for events of any scale, oddly, even if it's a 500 player event, top 16, that's a win. That's what we're looking at, right? Going by just conversion rate among these decks, you actually have a lot of the decks we'll be talking about today doing very well. RAL is still number one. It has certainly dropped from its like 50% conversion rate when no one was playing it, and I was trying to get people to play it. But now, even still, as a more popular deck, a meta threat that people are aware of, it is still at a above 30% conversion rate, the highest of any deck above 20 entries. It's a much lower entry count than like your Tymna, of course, the most popular deck in the format, has 700 entries and is still rocking a high conversion rate. But just as a sort of overview, decks like RAL, still doing quite well. Rogsai, one of the biggest, quite popular decks, over 200 entries. Zirda the Dawnwaker, which, spoiler alert, I will be talking about today. Very low entry count, but it is definitely doing something and is approaching at a different angle. That is like, it's more akin to Kinnan in that it's like, or any of those other decks, especially like low color red decks we've seen historically that are like, I have a combo in the command zone. But Boros does have a lot of tools that can help it both police the table with potentially stacks effects, as well as also having lots of tutors and synergies for the types of combos they're looking to do, that I think has positioned it decently well. Another one I really want to point out is Inalla, which has been a popular fan favorite deck that has not done well almost ever. Anytime we ever look at it, you're like 10% or below conversion rate, and we're at 23 now. Again, lower entry counts, but I do think Inalla is attacking on an axis in Grixis that lets you kind of come from different angles, and in a way that we really only saw with like Malcolm Vile, which isn't really as popular at the moment. They're seemingly doing as well, and that it actually might be coalescing into something successful right now, because this is a deck that has struggled through a lot of the mid-range metas because it's so easy to answer the one thing it does. But when it's built to do like 3 or 4 different things, and all of them are really fast, it might be leading to a lot of success right now. And then a couple other decks that are not popular enough to go over, but I do want to mention decks like Lumra as proactive, even though it's not necessarily a turbo deck. Stella Lee, typically built to go very fast. Terra is a 5-color turbo list. We do, as we get down here, see more of the Malcolm Vials, the Wandering Minstrel, which I think is a deck that still has a ton of potential. A lot of the VVs are built pretty quick, but other decks that you might think, hey, in a turn 2 format, you play like your Cricks, they're still not doing great, your Dahadas, but they might still be providing something that is maybe getting overlooked. And you don't just have to go to your Rog size or whatever for your turbo meta. Dahada might be a good answer. Crick might be a good answer. I still think Kalia has been one of the most powerful playing turbo decks I've played, and just Mardu in general. Tymna Dargo as a really powerful option. There's a lot of options, and there's a couple even here that the entry level is just totally lower than it should be that I'll be talking about today. We're kind of going to go from like most known to most fringe, roughly. But yeah, let's just go ahead and hop into it and talk about Roxai. So we are going to be looking at Moxfield today, mainly because I wanted to look at, instead of specific tournament lists that are locked on Top Deck, I wanted to see what the players are currently playing, right? This is Dexter's list. I think just recently won another tournament, notably top 4, the Steel City Open, 500 player event. Just been on a great tear. You could also look at somebody like Jay Wood's list, Michael Schmidt. There's a bunch that are relatively similar, with maybe a couple different engines, but Rogsai is probably one of these decks that is the most locked in terms of what it looks like. The axis that Rogsai attacks from is just being the best Grixis deck, right? Just being a fully non-synergistic Grixis list that is empowered by Rograk. We've talked about Rograk a ton. He's just still broken, right? You're still enabling Mox Amber and Flare of Duplication and Deflecting Spot and Fierce Guardianship for 0 mana. It is still quite powerful to just be a little bit faster and better than everyone else at enacting a Grixis core game plan. And it's still doing incredibly well. This is one of the most popular decks. It has a very high conversion rate. It's doing very well in events. And I think we've talked about on the podcast and just in general that it's probably still one of the most underplayed decks in the format. Mainly, I think, because it's so scary at the beginning. Like it's intense to play. Like it feels like you get very heavily threat assessed at the beginning. And I don't think any deck is more in line with the phrase, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, than Rogsai, because you're getting that heat because you're worth giving that attention to. You're just a really powerful deck, and most of these players are still winning anyways. They have a higher conversion rate than those safe decks that you're playing. So notably, creatures. We have seen some experimenting with cards like Spiderpunk, as well as mana engines like Storm, Kiln Artist, and Vivi. This list is just a very clean Storm package. Also not running Orcish Bowmasters, which is very much more a mid-range side tool or a different kind of win you can go for with wheel loop. Sometimes after you've exiled some win cons, it's something you go for and just helps you control. But if you're looking to just jam, this is probably the creatures you should have, right? Ragavan, Thoracle, Bergi, Simian Spirit Guide, Valley Flood Caller, with considerations to cards like Storm Kiln Artist, which can really help clean up your mana and be super powerful. Really great at those in-step wins with Necropotence. Your sorceries, you have your Grixis Tutors, ritual type effects with J-Will and Rite of Flame. Here on the 3 wheels, I've seen some people mess around with Wheel of Misfortune again as a 4th wheel. Just powerful Grixis stuff. And then also opting for Mnemonic Betrayal and Praetor's Grasp. Ways to break top deck tutors. I know Dexter's really high on, like your Gitaxian Probes, your Brainstorms, your Chromatic Stars, as ways to just speed you up a turn, right? If you go Imp Seal into pass, not super, ecstatic about that. But once you have mana and have some card selection, it just helps speed you up a little bit. And then as well as the extra turn effects, right? The Last Chance, Warrior's Oath, and the Final Fortune, all here to help you speed up. This is one of the things that other decks maybe should look into doing. You can have Dramatic Reversal, which is kind of like one of those extra turn effects. It can be based on your board state that really it seems like only the ROG pilots want to do. And a lot of it is just because this is such a consistent like turn 3 protected win or turn 2 probably unprotected, maybe protected win deck, and just getting an extra turn, for 2 mana is quite nice. So yeah, we just really prioritizing lots of churning through I think this deck churns probably harder than most decks do with all the wheel effects that you can run. Your J-Wills, your Beseech to find these or Breach, and all roads really lead to Breach. I think that's what this deck does maybe better than any other deck in terms of fueling it quickly. Making sure you do little things like Infernal Plunge and make sure you put ROG in the graveyard. Knowing tricks to do like Diabolic Intent, sacrificing ROG from the graveyard with Breach and using ROG as escape fuel. Knowing little things like that with ROG, because like the margin of error can be very small when you're going for very early wins, right? The interactive package offer has definitely become a pretty good staple, almost like your Manamorphose in a lot of ways for instant speed Necro wins, which is maybe the thing that this deck is best at doing, is converting Necropotence into a win that turn or the turn after. Between the extra turn effects, Dramatic Reversal, your Born Upon a Wind, your offer to get the red pips to do the other thing or to make mana right, you just have so many options to get wins faster than others. And then, of course, your Rogue Rack is helping enable mana with Mox Amber, Phyrexian Tower, cards like that to just give you an extra push. I don't want to spend too long on Rockside because I think it is the most known, but it's hard to not harp on it when I think like it's still so underplayed. You just get mana. I think the scary part is you don't really get cards out of the command zone, but right now, I think in a very turbo environment, cards like Tymna and Crom, Thrasios, things like that are backup plans that are not consistently generating a lot of advantage unless you have failed to win in the early game, or you've played to not play the early game, which this deck doesn't really do, right? Looking to play a deck like Rog or Ral or Rowan or Zirda or whatever, those are decks that are looking to make their A plan more powerful. And I think if you want to do that, and you arguably should be, that's why you want to look at a deck like Rogsai. But yeah, we're just going Nas, Necro. All roads usually lead to Breach. That should be your default winning in Grixis if you're not used to playing these colors. Every time you have a tutor, you should ask yourself, does this go get Breach to win the game? And then you should probably try to do that because that is just the most compact, ridiculous, powerful way to win the game right now. When you have cards like Rain of Filth that help back that up, the wheels, any tutor, when you have like Beseech, 3 demonic tutors, really, a lot of times there just is a way to get to Breach, and that's what you should be trying to do. A lot of the other decks we're talking about today are not doing Grinding Station. It is a way to very compactly win with Breach, and I think if you're looking to increase your time to kill by like half a turn, this is a way to do it, I think, about as consistently as adding in the Final Fortune effects, right? As just a really compact way to win where just Mamber, Breach, Grinding Station can often present a turn 1 or turn 2 win. On the flip side, a card that's really good against Turbo and is really good at enabling your stuff to go through is Vexing Bauble. I think this card is like the tech piece for any deck, really. There's not a deck it's super bad into. If you see this and you're like, yeah, but you have so many free things or whatever, the best Rogsai pilots are playing it. They're playing it. I promise you they're right about it. It is a very, very powerful card that you should be considering right now. Things you might get tripped up on in Rogsai is your Necro game plans. Generally speaking, an early Necropotence, especially if it has like a Dark Ritual behind it and there's no real permanent based mana, you should be looking to dig to like refuel a ham, typically like go to like 14 cards and sculpt a 7, and then look to win the turn after that. Necro Dominance is a much harder beast to deal with, and it's one of those cards where sometimes you will just hate it. I've seen people run like Steel Enchantment over it. It is still a great way to look at more cards than the rest of the table, but there's not as clean of a here's what you do with it that I can give you as Necropotence, which is like you mull to like 6, land, ritual, Necro, you're down to like 4 cards, and then you Necro for 10, sculpt the 7 out of the 14, and then you win the next turn. Necrodom, try to get rid of it. Typically opt for Thoracle over Breach because Breach is going to be a lot harder with all the graveyard being totally shut off in every way. And then you always have Rhystic Fish to fall back on. Looks like Dexter's list is currently on 23 lands, Soul lands, your Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, Phyrexian Tower, 1 Surveil land, which is pretty commonplace, starting town, Otawara. Again, not as much to talk about with Rogsai. You should be pretty acquainted with these. A misconception I see with a lot of people is they think that this is a Turbo Nods deck. It's not really. I would describe this deck as a Turbo Payoff deck, meaning that any sort of payoff that will get you a lot of cards like your Nas, your Necros, Wheels, or a win with your Thoracle or Breach, those are what you're looking for. You're not really dedicated to one of these things. And I would say I think of this deck more as a Necro Breach deck than as a like Nas Thoracle deck. But you do have a lot of flexibility in what you tutor for. But again, I would say opt for a Breach win first, then opt for like Necro or Nas second. Necro Born is probably the most broken thing you get to do in this deck. And just a Breach before everyone else gets to represent, interaction. It's probably the best thing you can actually do. Rogsai, obviously, stupendous deck, super powerhouse. I think it's still underplayed. I would just grab Dexter's list and play it if you're interested in just generally playing Turbo. You can't really go wrong with this deck. Be diligent with your mulligans. You can't keep a hand that's just all mana. This deck doesn't convert mana into anything in the command zone, so you need to keep payoffs in your opener. Next up, we are taking a look at, dude, what is this? This is a definitely what? We're looking at Ral, Monsoon Mage. This is Pigeon's list. It is very similar, like he mentions here, to Blake's list. I think they're 2 cards off in the main. Ral Monsoon Mage. This is another commander who is primarily broken because it's giving you mana advantage in the command zone, but unlike Rog, he is also providing a very real payoff in the command zone. The Ral ultimate is your game plan. It is very much part of it. Sometimes you win without it, but casting a bunch of spells with Ral, being broken, having the cost reduction on your Izzet commander, flipping Ral using those spells, and then getting more spells to then kill your Ral or he dies when you ult, and you get more spells and just chaining into some kind of storm win. That is your game plan. You are keeping hands that cast an early Ral and then push a win. I would say the strength of Rogsai is in mana consistency and in flexible game plans that can prioritize different things. You can go for Necros, go for Nauses, go for Ristics because you have such high access for tutors. You can opt to play different game plans. I would say that Ral doesn't have that strength really in any way, but what Ral provides is maybe the most consistent turn 2 win attempts in the format. I think the average win for Ral is somewhere between 2 and 3. It's not so much one of those turn 3 with protection and you kind of need the protection because by turn 3 people are developed. I think Ral is probably the most turn 2 is a privilege deck in the format currently. It just provides so much mana cheating and converts such junky kind of cards into wins where just any amount of cards that churn through your deck will get you to a win eventually if you can just keep it going. The numbers on Ral, right? Ral you can flip anytime, but you really are looking for the number 6. That is the key number with Ral because Ral will enter with 6 additional counters if you cast 6 instant or sorceries, so you can immediately ult it. If you haven't played Ral or against it, typically the play pattern is turn 1 Ral is ideal in your opener. Turn 1 or 2 Ral, turn 2 or 3 win is basically it. And usually what that means is early Ral into typically a ritual, some kind of effect to churn, and then you're looking to chain spells until you get the Ral count to 6. If you haven't just found a win naturally, right, because you run Underworld Breach, things like that, win a flip at some point, the earlier the better, but cast spells to win the flip Ral, ultimate Ral, and then you exile the top 8 instant sorceries you cast for free. Your deck is 30 sorceries and 29 instants, so very high density of instants and sorceries for you to hit. If you kill your Ral, when you recast him, all those free spells you cast with Ral are very likely to flip him again and just keep the thing going. The creatures have become very clean in the deck where literally they're all just here for mana. Other than Pinnacle Monk, which is here as a land that has some extra text on it. Simeon, Ragavan, Tavern, Bergi, Electro, new tool for the deck. Sticker Goblin, Stormkill, Treasonous Ogre. These are all just here to make mana. Generally speaking, your bottleneck in this deck is pips. So having a card like Treasonous Ogre to never really run out of red pips. Same thing with Bergi, Stormkill. But they are all just here to facilitate netting you mana. Turn 1 Ragavan into turn 2 Ral with, an extra treasure available. Pretty common play pattern. And then you're going for wins. So our instants and sorceries are really built around the idea of the Ral reduction. So you do have cards that are just a pip, but they're generally because they're quite powerful. Strike It Rich helps you set up for mana. Gamble in any breach deck, of course, is good. Get Probe, Rite of Flame, nets you mana. Overmaster gives you some kind of hedges your bets against interaction while also cantripping. But then you have rituals like Hidden Strings is kind of a super Rite of Flame. Typically 1 mana untap 2 lands and then often untap another 2 because you can cipher it onto Ral, swing in with Ral, get the other cast and make more mana. You're really built around these 2 mana cards that see you 2 cards. So often it is 1 mana for 2 cards because you Highway Robbery, spend 1 red, get 2 cards. Romantic Rendezvous, same deal. Rob the Archives, Impulse Draw Effect, same thing with the Reckless Impulse. These are all just cards that help you see more cards. Cards like Glimpse the Impossible, which not every deck is on. Very similar deal. Cards that see you more cards for not a lot of mana. Typically, the best cards in the deck are things like Jessica's Will, which are you should generally treat as a win condition in this deck. Probably going to win if this resolves. And then Wheels, cards that just get you more action. Wheel of Misfortune, Wheel of the Jeskai, Wheel of Time Twister, Echo of Eons. I have done turns where I hard cast the front of Echo, it gets countered, and then I cast the back, and then I win. You can make mana like that. This is Past in Flames, which is obviously in your all instants and sorcery deck, very, very, very powerful. And this is the kind of stuff you're doing. You're pretty often, I would say, like a normal Ral kind of win is Ral into like Desperate Ritual, which is, Dark Ritual basically in this deck. Generally speaking, if you did Ral turn 1, so you're at like 4 mana, spend another red to do something like Demand Answers, draw 2 cards. Ral is slipping during this. And then you're just trying to keep the thing going, not running out of mana. And you just kind of keep it going, right? Cast the Jessica's Will into a wheel and just keep casting spells until you flip Ral. A lot of times the actual spell doesn't matter. It's just the density of cards that make mana and cards that find more cards. Your actual win conditions, you have Raw, Normal, Underworld Breach. You do have LED and Brain Freeze. Also can perform Reiterate loops. where you cast Reiterate with buyback, targeting something that makes more mana than this cost. Typically, like Jessica's Will is a great target. Can also work with Seething Song. Can work with a couple different things depending on the mana engines that you have in play. Then you are going to make infinite mana, have that Reiterate back into your hand, and then you can use any sort of damage-based payoff to kill the table, like Gut Shot, Lava Dart, Lightning Bolt. Could potentially wheel them out. It's a little bit more dubious. You can also do this through the One Ring by using Witch's Mark, which gets around the One Ring. It also doesn't make you draw cards, so you won't deck yourself with this. A lot of the lists do run bonus around, which can create some loops as well, or just enable so much spell casting nonsense that you kind of go over the top. Honestly, the main win condition of this deck is concession. People just don't want to deal with it. But in terms of actual win cons, you have a few different options. And that's the bread and butter of it, really. You're looking for hands that make you some mana. If they have protection to go with them, great. But ideally, you're just casting spells, buying back those spells with things like Invoke Calamity or the Will of the Jeskai or the Past in Flames, and you just keep spinning your wheels. You are the most like dedicated storm deck in the format. You're on very low lands. You don't want too many lands gumming up your Ral flips, and you don't want to see that many lands, right? You're really trying to win turn 2-ish, so you don't want to see too many. Another deck that's on Vexing Bauble, despite winning by casting free spells, it's just worth doing. This card is just cracked. I think it can feel a little bit more intense. You typically have to mulligan very, very aggressively. Similar with Rogsai, but I think even more so. You're looking for more specific types of hands. It's not really looking to play a long game and doesn't have a way to pivot into them, by tutoring for like a Ristic Study. That's just the thing you could have access to technically. So I think this can be a little bit more intense than playing something like Rogsai or some of the other decks we're going to be talking about, but it is ridiculously powerful still. It is the most dedicated Storm list in the format, I think. So if you're looking to do that kind of Is It Storm thing, like I think this, I mentioned when VV was printed, Ral is just better than VV. If you want to do the VV style thing, just play Ral and actually win instead of like trying to land a Curiosity on your 3-drop. I think this deck is just way more consistent and lethal than that deck is. Next up, we are looking at Etali, another, I guess you could say, Storm deck. Maybe the most single-minded deck that we're going to be talking about. You are looking to resolve Etali. This is probably the most beginner-friendly of these decks, I would say. It has obviously become quite popular. I do think it's probably on a downtrend, and this is the deck that is most easily disrupted by metagame shifts. If cards like Durannith Magistrate become very popular, Vexing Baubles, things like that we've been talking about, this deck's ability to do its main game plan is very hampered, more so than a lot of these other decks. So Etali, 7 mana. You guys kind of know the deal with Etali. You are looking to cast it very quickly. Your deck is just built to do that. Similar to the other decks, the creature package is almost exclusively mana or cards that are good with Etali. This list has a couple of concessions for like cards that are good to flip off of Etali, like Chandra Flameshaper. You don't generally want to just cast on its own, but it's really good to flip off Etali. Same thing with Emrakul, really, really powerful for that. And you do have Squee for the Food Chain combo. Food Chain on its own is just broken in this deck and usually wins the game anyways, but then you have Squee to completely deterministically win. And then just Etali doublers, right? Jaxis, your Rionias, Roaming Throne. You're just kind of built to do your one thing. You're making mana and doing that. We have seen more lists opt for more removal for draw engines, which can be really dangerous to jam into with this list. So this list is opting for Nature's Claim, Emerald Charm, and then like some concessions for interaction, right? Veil of Summer, the 2 Red Blast, Guttural Response. But then the rest of this is just mana, right? Desperate Ritual, Manamorphose, which doesn't net you mana, but still for churning. Open the Omen Paths. But yeah, we are really the most one-track minded deck in the format. We're just trying to flip Etali and do the Etali thing, and we're built entirely to do that, really. I think this list is generally easy to mulligan with in that you know roughly pretty easily how likely a hand is to line up with your plan, right? You kind of just goldfish with your ability to like pay for triggers and things like that. It can get a little bit more complicated, and sometimes what you opt for with your Etali flips, right? What's worth doing? Do you try to play around Mindbreak Trap if possible? But often you're just trying to do like a turn 2 Etali. Like that's the ideal thing, right? Other win conditions you have, you can do Cloudstone Curio loops, netting infinite mana, and then infinitely Etaliing. Generally, your wins are just do infinite Etali. You also could do a breach line. You probably want to do it through Veil of just LED breach, Wheel of Fortune, going through your deck until you find a way to like deterministically win. You could also use that to put together Dualcaster Mage combo. Dualcaster Mage lines up pretty well in this deck because Molten Dupe, Twin Flame, Electro Duplicate are all cards you just want to run anyways with Etali. So this is like the one deck. It is pretty high card quality, but that's about it. You probably know Etali about as well as I do at this point. It is super popular. I do think I expect it to downtrend a little bit. I think this deck is probably going to be hurt the most by decks trying to target turbo strategies. There's a lot of different hate that can work against it. Sometimes artifact hate is enough. Sometimes spell casting, like tax effects or things that just cut off free spells, can obviously just completely destroy it. But it also can just most compactly put a win together with like nothing, right? You can just low mulligan for Etali, and Etali can just happen to get you a win. So it can be really high variance in that regard. Very powerful deck that you need to respect and is a pretty good option if you're trying to go quick. Next up, we are looking at another Grixis list because I think Inalla is currently doing well enough to actually maybe be justifying playing or looking at a lot more closely, and has enough different ways to win that I think is worth talking about alongside Rogsai and some of these other turbo decks. So like this says, we're looking at the Inalla list that topped Steel City Open. I think it got like 9th. It was in top 16 of 500 players. This Inalla, while it is really, really cool, is very hard to read. You probably know Inalla, but otherwise, you don't really ever cast it. It has an imminence effect, so you always have access to this ability. When another non-token wizard you control enters, you can pay 1 to make a token copy of it with haste. So this is most notable with its win con with Spellseeker. I'm not going to go through that line. I mean, there's primers here. It's roughly from this to this. Here, this is how you win. 2 of any mana, a blue and a black Spellseeker. Generally speaking, cast Spellseeker with a black mana available. And then you layer your Inalla triggers, go through your deck, blah, 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 and there's different ways to get around it. But this is your main line. Spellseeker is a 1-card win condition in the deck. There's also lines with Ruthless Technomancer and Bloodline Necromancer, which you can do with Ruthless Engrave and a way to get Bloodline Necromancer onto the battlefield to have the end result of infinite treasures and hasty attackers. That is, if you're unfamiliar, Ruthless Technomancer, which is, and then Bloodline Necromancer, which when it enters, you can return a vampire or wizard from the graveyard to the battlefield. You can kind of see how stacking 2 of those can potentially do some powerful things. And then we have access to Hoarding Broodlord combos. Skull of the Ages is part of these combos. And then we have Kefka as one of the more powerful wizards printed recently, especially at higher CMCs. That can just kind of be a value engine on its own, making a hasty Kefka obviously pretty good. That's 2 Kefka ETBs and a hasty one. That's pretty hot. And then Overeager Apprentice, which is like a ritual. It discard a card and sack it to make double or make triple black. So you can, for 4 mana, you get 6 black mana out of the bodies. Snapcaster Mage. This is one of the decks that I'm just like excited to see be good because it is so cool. And you, like I mentioned, you're in a spot now where you have lines that are a little bit harder to disrupt. Spellseeker, any counter magic or removal or graveyard hay, or that there's lots of different ways to interact on top of it. As you can see with the Technomancer line, if you go through it, there is no spell casting once the Technomancer enters. You are just using activated abilities and Inalla triggers to make your infinite treasures and hasty attackers. So that's an axis that I think is really nice when you can just cast creatures and win. That's been a strength of decks like Malcolm Vile, and not even needing a commander to set it up because you always have access to that effect is pretty nice. That's a bit of redundancy that's pretty ridiculous. On top of that, of course, you are a Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, Tainted Pact deck that also has access to Underworld Breach combo with your Mystics, and Necropotence. So you have really technically all the same kind of wins. This list specifically is not on ad nauseum. Some of them are. You do have really high CMC stuff that makes it really difficult, especially if you're doing Broodlord, Skull of the Ages, Kefka stuff on top of these lines, which seem like you should be running. So opting out of ad nauseum to have access to, 1-card win cons with Spellseeker, creature-based win cons, super value that you can go for with your Inalla, if you build it to be more mid-rangey. You've got new cards like Lively Dirge, which I guess isn't new at this point, but I still think of as a new staple in the deck, or in the format. Lots of ways to refire with your reanimation effects. And again, like I mentioned, lots of the same strengths, right? You look at these cards, it's very similar to what we saw in Rogsai, but instead of getting the mana advantage of Rograk, you're getting the combo advantage of Inalla, which can be value, can be pure combo. Just one of those decks you should always be scared of, even though it does have lots of ways to interact with its main combo. You don't have to play as a super turbo, go all in list. You could opt for going for Ruthless Technomancer, Bloodline Necromancer lines, as your primary way to go about winning. If people are there thinking that a Silence is going to go well against you, you put Ruthless on the Bloodline on the stack, and then they cast Silence. Okay, nice. I win, which is a really good place to be in for a lot of these decks that just can't even beat that. So again, not a deck that I have as much to go over because I'm not going over the Inalla line. It's there for you to know about it, right? But this is a deck that I think lets you play the turbo plan, lets you play like a Grixis mid-range deck if you want to, and be built more for that. I've seen decks more like that just lets you opt for different things. And I think it is now at a place where seemingly it is worth doing those things. Whereas before, where it was just all in on, the depletion lands to have as many consistent turn 2 Spellseeker wins as possible that just always get blown up. I've literally never seen a Inalla Spellseeker win line work in person, at least. It sucks because I love that deck. It's not like a deck I want to trash. I think it's so cool. I'm thinking that this might actually be the time for Inalla to be doing well, and it might be a deck, especially if you look at Rogstein, you're like, it's not quite what I want to do. If you're willing to learn the Spellseeker line, this might be the deck for you. If you're willing to kind of put in the reps through that and understand it, and if not, at least know the rest of what this deck can offer you. Definitely a deck to watch out for right now and a contender as a Grixis list. Tymna Dargo is probably the Mardu deck of the format at the moment. I do think there are other Mardu decks that probably represent a similar power level and similar advantages that they provide, but this is definitely the flagship Mardu deck right now, and I do think it is warranted. It is powerful. You have Tymna as basically a backup way to get you some card advantage. It's giving you black and white, but mainly you have Dargo. That's your commander. Dargo is there to enable powerful combos with your nonsensical text on this guy. It's very easy to reduce his cost to his commander tax to 0 and then perform combos, a lot of times featuring Bergie and then a sack outlet, like your Altar of Dementia to mill yourself and or the table, your Goblin Bombardment to kill the table. A lot of times you can start doing nonsense with Walter or Altar of the Wretched to have this enter, draw 7, mill 7. You have Ruthless Technomancer that operates similarly, where it's going to enter, eat your Dargo, make 7. I think someone had commented in the last video, you can also loop Balloon Man and Technomancer. This list specifically built to take advantage of these sort of trinkety creatures. Really, we are trying to get lots of Dargo material out, reduce our Dargo cost down by sacrificing a bunch of that material, assemble a combo featuring something like Bergie, those other enablers, while also being a Mardu breach list, right? You can also still use these same tools that you're using to assemble that to, beseech the mirror for Underworld Breach and do a breach win with so like Altar of Dementia with LED or Lotus Petal will mill you a whole bunch of cards. You escape something, you still get to go through your deck. You even can kill people with Ballista Citadel, which is really, really cool if you keep escaping that and then sacking it to its effect if you make a bunch of stuff. I think that's more of a Dahada thing, but you can do it. But then setting up those Goblin Bombardment wins. So you get to be a fast Nas and Pier and Citadel list on top of having these compact, I wouldn't say creature combos because they almost all have enablers that are non-creature, but they're basically creature combos. They can be very hard to interact with, setting up the part of it that is the broken engine in a deck that has just been really fine-tuned to attack the meta. Again, another Vexing Bauble deck. You have access to like every good silence effect, right? The Orm's Champ, Voice of Victory, Grand Abolisher. We're now on my rail. I mentioned that with a Pyre of Heroes, you gotta have this human toolbox you can work through. Academy Rector can just go put your Breach or your Bombardment straight into play. Same thing with Necro. A lot of the same tools as the Grixis list, but you are built to be even more proactive, right? Like we've talked about the cutting counter spells in the format and how that might be the case. And people will look at blue decks that do that and say, that's irresponsible, that's wrong. How many counter spells does this deck play? None. I mean, you have the silence effects, but there's no actual counter magic. You have, in terms of on the stack interaction, Orm's Chant, Silence, which are proactive. You don't really do them in response to a counter spell. It doesn't work. And then Deflecting Swat. And then you have a little bit of removal, creature based, like permanents you can put into play that stop people, but that's it. You're not running a bunch of counter magic. And these decks are still winning tournaments. They're winning 200 plus player events with no counter spells whatsoever. So I think that is in general something to look at when you're building any deck, is that your deck can be built to succeed, right? These are blue farm colors minus blue. Obviously, having access to Dargo changes your deck construction because you can't build around Crom combos. I don't know any of those. But it is really something I think people should think about when they're building decks, especially to go fast. How much interaction do you really need? And what can you opt for instead that puts you in a direction that side skirts interaction, right? The strength of this deck, you still have a lot of different axes to work on, the Dargo combos, the Necro, the Breach stuff, but I would say mainly it's that you're operating a little bit different than other people. You're doing things with creatures that are a little bit harder to disrupt, kind of similar to what Inalla is doing, but in a way that really rewards a mass of stuff, right? So if you do play a long game, it does just get easier for you to win because the Dargo stuff just gets easier. The Tymna plan becomes more real. So it does give you access to playing more mid-rangey, although that I think that shouldn't be your primary goal. You should be trying to do the broken stuff that other decks don't get to do first, and then you get to fall back on Tymna. If nobody's winning, then I'll draw some cards. Eventually, I'll resolve a Ranger Captain or something. You run more threats than anyone at the table runs interaction, I promise you. Next up, we are looking at the Rowan list that I recently covered. There are not a lot of people playing this deck. So for some context for the stats we were looking at earlier, right? Rowan does not come up for 20 plus entries because it doesn't have 20 plus entries in the last 3 months. We have to get rid of this restriction entirely to find Rowan. I mean, you have some nonsense like 1 entries or 2 entry stuff, but among the 19 entries, we have 7 top cuts for a 36% conversion rate. Obviously, we are very low to be comparing this to like, a deck with 200 entries, but having played this deck and really trying to understand it and see the value in it, I do think this is an underplayed powerhouse in the Sans Blue turbo piles or turbo options in the format right now. And it's really one of the most consistent decks in the format. It feels a lot like Ral in that regard, but less intense on the mulligan. So let's talk about it now that I have much more experience with the list. So, Rowan Scion of War, 1 in Rakdos, Menace, tap, spells you cast this turn that are black and or red, cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn, activate only as a sorcery. What this deck is really trying to do is cast Rowan on turn 2, activate Rowan on turn 3, and win the game. The percentage of opening hands that do this is very high because this list is really just built to do this. It has really been tuned to do the thing. Generally speaking, a hand with like 2 lands and a Skirk Prospector, or a Ragavan, or a Blood Pet, or a Rite of Flame, or whatever, they're pretty much keeps because the density of payoffs is so high. When we see this like reduce the cost of spells, what is the average for that, right? When you look at Ral, you really assess every card as though it costs 1 less. I think for Rowan, the default is generally 3. That's like an average because there are so many lands that they bolt you. All the MDFCs are 3 damage to you. The fetch into shock is 3. Tarnished Citadel is 3. So I think that's a pretty good default. And there's a lot of overlapping stuff, right? Maybe I have Shockland and Starting Count. That's 3. I would say 3 is usually the base. Sometimes, yeah, you're going to low roll and you don't quite get that. And maybe it's 2 that you're working with, which is tougher. I would say 3 to 5 is the normal range. I'd get up to 7. That would be like bolt in a land, tap Tarnished Citadel, have a City of Brass in play. That's 7. It gets to that pretty quickly. That's actually not that hard to do. And then you mix in any of the Phyrexian mana, right? So a lot of times the play pattern is play the land, lose life, activate Rowan, holding priority, gutshot something, lock in that 2 life. And it could be gutshot myself, right? So it's really easy to get this reduction from 3 to 5. And when you evaluate these cards in that 3 to 5 range, they're really broken. Disciple of Bolus is ETB, sack a creature, gain X life, draw X cards where it's that power. You don't care about Rowan, so it's usually Rowan. So this is basically 1 black mana, gain 4 life, draw 4 cards. Grim Servant is a 1 mana, kind of a tutor. Young Necromancer is often just another reanimate. Crick is often free. Pay 6 life, free Crick. When that happens, you usually win the game. I have assembled Crick Villas and Shieldred multiple times. I haven't played this deck that much, and I've assembled this combo many times, literally with Peer into the Abyss as backup. I've assembled this combo just doing that and being like, okay, well, if they counter all this, I can Peer. And then the combo just works. It's like, yeah, I also had Peer I could do. And so when you start to reevaluate these cards through this lens, they're just so broken. Obviously, Treasonous Ogre is good in or out. If you get to do turn 2 Ogre plus Rowan, you're almost certainly winning turn 3, right? Probably be hard to untap with all of that, but frick, if you do it, you win. Or you just get it into play, right? You get to do the Treasonous Ogre plus Villas, which this is a Russian Villas. Villas is when you lose life, draw that many cards. You get to do pretty compact things once you like really look at the deck from the perspective of these spells cost 3, 4 less. I've got to do really cool things like Final Parting for Reanimate Villas. That's awesome. Past in Flames and Will of the Jeskai are just better cards than Underworld Breach in this deck because they are more efficient. One of the most powerful things about Breach is when you're churning through your deck and you run a bunch of Demonic Tutors and cards that combo with Breach, it's like the most efficient way to win. When I have Sorceress Scheme to get back cards and Snort to wheel and have a wheel with Flashback that often costs also 1 mana, and then I get to Past in Flames it all, and if they interact with the Past in Flames, I get to flash it back for 1 mana. The efficiency of these cards just really challenge your card assessment and make a lot of things playable. I even mentioned in the first video before I had played this deck that this deck seems like it will age better than most because every set gets overpriced commander cards. And those are the best cards in this deck. I mean, Pirate's Pillage and the instant version of it as well. These 4 mana, discard a card, draw 2, make 2 treasures. These are like your bread and butter payoffs. This is like a Rite of Flame that draws 2 cards, right? You run a lot of Demonic Tutor lights like Coveted Prize, which is basically just a Demonic Tutor. It's reduced. Dark Petition is often, 2 2 black mana, make 3 black mana demonic tutor. Demonic collusion is discard 2. Sometimes you buy back, sometimes you don't, and you just get to keep demonic tutoring. Illicit shipment, often you sack Rowan, so this is double black, double demonic tutor. Increasing ambition, double demonic tutor. Inspired tinkering is one of the main payoffs I go for when I'm tutoring, because it's 1 red, make 3 treasures, exile 3 cards. It's like better than Jessica's will. You know, Beseech the Queen is often free. And then if you mix Villas into this, or Crick into this, very often, like a very common play pattern is activate Rowan for, 4 or 5, tutor for Crick, play Crick. All the black spells are now free in your deck. And then you're just tutoring and seeing what you get. And you're just trying to go up in cards, or, you find Villas and that just wins. Crick plus Villas will just win you the game immediately. You'll draw your deck, find Shieldred, make life while you do it. It's cracked. This deck is actually really, really strong. I think I'm going to be playing this at Frenzy at the Falls, at least in the creator event, maybe in the main one. Just do some goldfishing with this deck. You keep any hand with turn 2 Rowan, it probably goldfishes a turn 3 win. Yeah, and so there are just lots of goofy, overpriced cards, but they're really good. This deck is not a joke. And there's a whole different build with this deck too. There is a Dragonstorm list. I haven't played the Dragonstorm list, so there is access to that. In terms of actual wins, you can, similar to Ral, do your reiterate loops, where you reiterate. It's much easier to do it, right? You can do this with like any card that makes mana. Reiterate for infinite mana, and then use it on a damaging spell. Or you can do the Searing Touch combo, where if you have a reduction of 4, as well as like Bergie or Stormkill Artist, you can infinitely Searing Touch the table. There are a bunch of side kind of combos you can do where like Villas plus Crick Shieldred draws your deck to do any of these things and assemble it. It's kind of similar to Ral where you spin your wheels, but I think this deck is even easier to just cut the table off and win. A lot of times the time I spend storming is just like, all right, I've already beat one piece of interaction. If there's something niche that I need to play around, I just have the free will to do all that. So I'll just tutor for extra stuff, make sure I have a Past in Flame so that when I peer, I can flash it back, and then just set it up to where like I can beat like 3 things and still, win over the top. And sometimes you will have more tight games where you can't do that. You're just jamming and hoping. But man, this deck plays through interaction so well. It's so similar to Ral in that regard. I think it's great. I think this deck is awesome. One weakness of this deck I do foresee being could be an issue is if you are worried, especially later in turn order, you're worried about getting a turn 3. That does mean that your ability to keep okay 7s that are turn 2 Rowans is really cut off. This list really is turn 3, you win the game. But if that's not good enough, that's not good enough. And you might have to, if the meta gets much faster where I really cannot reliably expect to have a turn 3 if I'm not helping the table, I might have to be built to be even faster than that. So far it's done really well even in turbo environments. That is something I'm thinking about if we get to the pure turn 2 as a privilege metagame. It's tough for this deck to win turn 2. I've done it. I've done turn 2 wins, protected with 2 wins I can send, but that is definitely not the average. That's starting to be more in the high range of hands. Your mileage will vary, and maybe in later seed order, you are supposed to be much more aggressive, which means your average number of payoffs you keep in your opening hand is going to be lower too. So while I am very high on this deck, that is something on the back of my mind, but I'm very high on it and it's so much fun. I really think if you're looking for a deck to play that's different, that's powerful, that's consistent, Rowan is a great place. And it's like, this is the actual Crick deck. This is like secret partner Crick. So much fun to play. This is one of my favorite decks. I've ordered it. I have like almost the entire deck coming in Japanese foil. I'll be doing a bling video on that. I'm excited. I'm super excited. This is going to be awesome. Love this deck. It's so much fun. Even if I lose on it, if I go to Frenzy and I get bodied, I've had so much fun playing this deck. I don't care. Last up is Zirda, which we looked at having like the second highest conversion rate of 20 plus. This is the deck, I will be honest with you guys, like I tend to be. I'm fairly ignorant about how this deck really operates in terms of the mulligans, what I really should be looking for. It has a detailed primer for you to go through. My personal information on it and experience with it is very low, but I have found, I just did like, 20, 30 goldfishes. And very quickly I figured like, okay, well I keep a hand that finds a monolith and then, wow, I don't even know this deck works and I'm winning turn 2 with backup. So that's a good place to be in, right? Keeping those big mana Tezzeret hands, they usually win with this deck. So if you're unfamiliar, which I'm assuming most people are, and again, I really apologize if I don't cover the full breadth of what this deck can do, but I really want to highlight it because I think it's underexplored and it's already doing really, really well. And it's something that I've already felt the power of, and I really just want to showcase to you guys what it can do. So Zirda the Dawnwaker is Boros commander, hybrid Boros colors, so very easy to cast. Companion text is irrelevant. Abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana, and then it has its own activated ability, target creature can't block. This combos, well, we can just look at the primer, which showed that. Infinite colorless, you have Zirda plus Basalt, Zirda plus Grim Monolith because it reduces that activated ability by 2, so you go to infinite. Metalworker, Umbral Mantle, 2 artifacts in hand, infinite colorless. Metalworker, Staff of Domination, 3 artifacts in hand. Zirda, Metalworker, Umbral Mantle, you get into more niche stuff with extra stuff for infinite colorless. And then you have different ways to win with your infinite mana. So you have Walking Ballista, infinite mana would kill the table. You can go Thran Spider to get access to all the artifacts in your deck, which you're going to symbol. You can do Godo combo. We are on Helm of the Host to just kill the table. You can also put your infinite mana into Staff of Domination to draw the deck. You can put it into Diviner's or Diviner's Wand. I think it's actually Diviner's, but Diviner's just sounds better. The wand to draw your deck. Like I mentioned, you can do infinite damage with a ballista. You can do the Godo thing, but you're really built to be an artifact combo deck. Generally, at least I've kind of found, keeping a hand that can find the infinite mana is pretty good. Though that's in goldfishing, right? You do actually have a lot of play into mid-range games because you have cards like Esper Sentinel, Ragavan, Archivist of Ogma, Magda, Tataru Taru, the Ranger Captain, the Engineers and Welders to be able to symbol stuff, Oswald, which can be obviously a combo engine, but when you have this many artifacts, it has lots of different things you can do, right? You can turn a 0 into a Grafdigger's Cage to slow down the table. You can get Portable Hole, like another Vexing Bauble deck, Soul Cauldron. You have lots of options. Disruptor Flute. You have lots of options to interact or slow the table down. Cards like Damping Sphere. You're on Deafening Silence as a stacks piece, as well as Aethersworn Canonist, which are stacks pieces. You're definitely not a stacks deck, but you have the ability to play the game in a way that prioritizes stopping the person who's currently winning while mainly trying to just, untap with an effect that keeps people from stopping you. And then just a symbol infinite win con, right? Tezzeret has looked amazing in this deck. You just use it to untap the monolith to help recast the Zirda. I've kept hands where I use this to untap Mopal and I use it to find a key to get the pips to Zirda and go infinite. Tezzeret just looks cracked in this deck. The Welders and Engineers look great because you have such access to great ways to find your enablers and your payoffs, right? Like Stoneforge Mystic both can find the Umbral Mantle to enable an infinite win, as well as finding the wand to be an outlet for it. You can also cheat those into play. Have lots of artifact tutors, right? Like Delivery Moogle, which finds you an artifact, 2 or less. You have Gamble, Reckless Handling, which is gamble for artifacts. Sevrek to get that stuff back. Good red interaction is worth playing, or Boros interaction, right? Your silences, your charms, timely malfunction. You get to play with powerful cards like the Keys, Peter Parker's Camera, Expedition Map, which can find up cards like Arena of Glory, probably not Abstergo Entertainment, but definitely can. Cavern of Souls, Mishra's Workshop. You get to play with broken cards like that a lot of decks don't get to play with. Inventors, I've used it to get Inventors Fair when I've gone infinite. Also getting to do non-deterministic infinite wins is fun, where make infinite mana and then Staff of Completion, and then you're kind of channeling into Thras basically, where you pay for life, draw a card to just look for ways to win, and you typically do. I've been really impressed with this deck. Now I haven't played against it, so I haven't got to see it too much in a real setting, though obviously it is doing very well for the players who are playing it. And this is just one of those decks that I think is really underexplored. I think it has been explored very well by the people who are using it, but it is probably deserving of more play. And I think the Boros, ness of it is getting people not to play it when actually it's probably worth it. And the ability for a deck like this that is very often going to be underestimated by the table to win turn 2, and even inexperienced hands like mine, is very impressive. I think this is definitely a deck to watch out for. It also very much seems like a deck that can be tuned for a meta very effectively, where you can lean to be more proactive, can lean to be more stacksy if you need to be. Gotten new tools like the Peter Parker's Camera, the Tezzeret, gets to play things like Damping Sphere and Disruptor Flute that can attack people on different axes, right? Damping Sphere is probably amazing into turbo meta. I've talked about how Vexing Bauble is phenomenal and you barely have any zeros that it's affecting. Really, really sick deck that I think should get some more eyes on it, and I wouldn't be surprised if it continued to do well. Again, yeah, it's not blue, but you still have your Smothering Tides, your Trouble in Pairs, the One Ring as engines if you want to play that way, and then stacks to keep you alive, and a decent amount of interaction and silence effects to push your wins. Like I think it covers a lot of those same bases like the Mardu decks do. You have more narrow tutors, they find all the things that you win with. I think it actually lines up pretty well. Let me know what you're thinking about these decks. I think they're pretty sick right now. Even if, maybe some of them, if they scale up a lot, they're not going to maintain the current level they do. But like, I don't know, dude. There's some really cool stuff happening in the format. Typically, like you see fringe stuff fail when it gets faster, where often a fast meta means that less things are viable. But there are some pretty proactive decks on that fringe side too that can still eat quite good in a meta where, people are cutting interaction. People are trying to interact with the main ways that people win, right? Like the Grixis Nas stuff. And if you're skirting around that by, activating Rowan and casting junk, that 2-for-1s everybody, and your Zirdas and your Ruthless Technomancers, that could be a really good spot to be in, especially when you have that pivot of just like, or I'll turn 2, turn 1, turn 2 Necro. So let me know what you're thinking about playing. I'm very excited to play more of these decks. It kind of makes me want to put Inalla together. Maybe I will. Really been enjoying Rowan. I like Ral. I basically just don't play that deck because it annoys everybody else I play with. But let me know what you're thinking. And if you would like to see the opposite side of this, where I talk about how to combat turbo from a more mid-rangey or stacks perspective. All that being said though, thank you so much for watching. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.